Alright crew, today I've got the Honda Insight DCDC converter and I've got it hooked up to simulate it being in a car. Of course it's not. What I have here is I have the Walmart special tractor battery, garbagey, and I've got a high voltage bank over here hooked up, and this is a programmable load. So what is a programmable load? This basically lets you set current, resistance, whatever. In this case I'm setting a load step which has a fixed slew rate of 500 milliamps per microsecond. This is no longer true with the 0 to 30 amps. We're going from 10 to 20 amps, and the reason is that this load can only sink 300 watts, and 14 volts at 30 amps is more than that. So anyway, we're doing a really fast load step on here. This is to simulate a very high current demand. So we're stepping this at about 2 kilohertz. So we're turning on and off from 10 to 20 amps 1,000 times per second, approximately. We'll see it on the scope here. That's off the top of the head. So what do we have here? Well, it's kind of a mess, and what I've intentionally done is I've hooked these high current leads up as close to this DC-DC converter so I can keep the inductive loop as short as possible, and that way we can really test the hell out of this DC-DC converter. This is a faster slew rate than probably any amount of bass you could play. So what I have over here, again, this is just hooked up. I've simulated the wire harness as if you turn the ignition key on when I plug that thing in. And so what we're going to do, I have it hooked up, the output, the 12 volt output I have hooked up to an oscilloscope. It's AC coupled on channel 1 here, and therefore whenever we turn it on we're going to see it jump, but the DC component we don't care about. We care about what happens to the DC-DC converter's output when we add a really large load step. So what we're going to do here, I have this thing all set up so it's just going to try to pull current as soon as we plug it in. We're going to turn the ignition on, which is just plugging in this Anderson connector here. And if you listen, you can actually hear that 2 kilohertz, that 1 kilohertz. It's right at 1 kilohertz. You see right here on our thing. So what do we have here? Well, we have a 12 volt output, which again it's actually 13.95 volts right now, and we are set in the AC coupled 200 millivolt range. So what we're saying is that on a 14 volt signal from a 10 to a 20 amp load step, we are getting a plus or minus 400 millivolt, 500 millivolt change. So we're losing. We're going within the rated output 13.9 volts, so 14 volts. We're going from 13.5 to 14.5 volts when we have this huge load step. Now this battery is helping. In this case, I have intentionally put some high gauge wire here to kind of simulate the length of the battery from the hood to the actual IMA bay where the DC-DC converter is located. Now what we'll see when we unplug even this garbagey lawnmower battery here, the noise is going to go up. This DC-DC converter has a loop rate of about 15 kilohertz, and we're hitting this thing with a much faster signal. The load step, again, we're stepping 10 amps in 20 microseconds. So that's a pretty large thing that this DC-DC converter is having to recover from. So when we unplug the battery, it's going to get worse. And so I'm going to do that now. And the way you turn the car off here is you turn the ignition off by unplugging the thing. And so actually what we've done, that's incorrect. Let me plug this back in. So what we're saying instead right now is that instead of turning the car off, what if you just disconnect the 12 volt battery completely? And that's what we just did. I just said it wrong. So I'm going to unplug the 12 volt battery completely. You can see that now we have, we're kind of out of scale here, but we're basically going down to plus or minus 800 millivolts. So we get a little bit worse, and that's again just because the DC-DC converter it's an active device, and the battery is a passive device. You put a load step on it, there's a chemical reaction that occurs. This is actually an active circuit that's having to modulate the output. So what we'll do is we'll plug this guy back in. The fan just came on. This DC-DC converter, this load is getting hot because it's sinking a lot of power right now. What if we do something else? So I have over here in my possession, this is a very small capacitor. It looks large, but it's only because it's rated for 100 volts. This is a 27 millifarad capacitor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the key off real quick. I was confused a second ago. What we're going to do is we're going to screw this on, and I'm going to attempt to do it one-handed. Maybe give it a little second to cool down too. I'm going to set the phone down real quick, on one take, and screw this on real quick. And again, the leads here are intentionally thick and short because we want to keep that inductance low. So if my recommendation when you're doing like car audio type stuff is you tap directly off the lugs. So here's the DC-DC converter. Tap directly off. There's my pins. There we go. Tap directly off these lugs with the big capacitor close to it, close to your amp or whatever. And here's why. So we'll see the difference. So now we've got the capacitor hooked up, basically the DC-DC converter, and we're going to turn this back on. Well, now look at our signal, and you can't hear it anymore either. And this is because the capacitor, again, is a passive component, and it's much faster than a battery can synthesize electrons chemically. A capacitor is just electrons crammed onto a plate. So what we've done now is we've decreased the ripple with this extremely high fixed slew rate of 500 milliamps per microsecond, and we've decreased it from the plus or minus 500 millivolts to probably around plus or minus 100 millivolts. We'll actually go in here and look at it to see, because we increased the range a little bit here. Get rid of that aliasing. Oh, and we lost it. That's probably good there. So yeah, we now have, it's 75 millivolts. So by adding a very small capacitor, again, this is 27 millifarads. The whole reason it's so large here is because it's 100 volt working rated voltage. So if you got a 25 volt rated capacitor, it'd be much smaller than this. And again, this is 27 millifarads, which is 0.027 farads. My recommendation on capacitors like this is to not buy the like Rockford Fosgate or whatever garbage stuff. You know, those things are complete garbage. If you want to see, they spend a ton more money on the outside than they do on a capacitor. Just go on DigiKey and buy a 25 volt rated capacitor with, you know, a 10 or 15 amp ripple current. It'll be much better. So here we are again, and again I've zoomed in. I'll zoom back out to where we were before. Let's see, we had, I don't remember where we were before. I think it was here, 200, oh whatever, I don't remember. But so here we are, we're zoomed in now, and again we're at plus or minus 75 millivolts, maybe somewhere around there. We're going to go ahead and unplug the car battery again. I'm going to do that here. Notice it doesn't really get any worse. It gets a little worse, but it's not crazy. And again, that's just because the capacitor is much better at synthesizing electrons than, say, this battery or the DC-DC converter. But the point of the story here is that you really, if you're putting amplifier stuff in, you should be pulling it off of the DC-DC converter, which is able to source that bulk voltage, that bulk current. So when you have just a constant music playing, your amplifier has capacitors in it. Probably be about this, you know, 100 millifarad range maybe inside of it. And that's sourcing all that peak slew rate. So again, this is a very, very quick, very fast rising edge. 500 milliamps per microsecond is pretty quick. That's a pretty big thump. Let's see if you can hear it turn down again. So anywho, the point of the story here is, don't run another battery into the back of your car. Don't try and run another lead off this battery, because it can't source that, it can't synthesize that current demand. Get a capacitor, install it right at your DC-DC, which is also where you should install your amplifier if you have a sub amp. But yeah, let me know if you have questions.